Leo Yu here?
I am.
Oh, okay. Is your video not working or something? Or like,
No, I forgot to start it.
oh, okay. No problem. Whenever you guys, there you go. All right. Whenever you guys are ready, I can begin. Oh, do you guys want to set up an email chain right now before we begin?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, let's put it in the chat.
I can start it if you.
Cool.
Okay, let me know when you guys receive it.
Okay, I got it.
Oh wait, I think. 1 second. It says I got a failure. Did you get it or no?
I got it. Tencent, did you get it?
Hold on, I'm checking right now.
Okay.
I haven't gotten it yet.
I think I might have sent the wrong. Wait, try this. Okay, there should have been a new one sent to everyone. Sorry.
There should be a one?
There should be a new one sent to everyone.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
So then whenever you're ready.
Okay, cool. Okay, so again, Bronx Science speaking first, affirming. And if you guys are ready, yep. Judge ready? Yep. All right. If everyone's ready, then I'll begin the time. Now, sorry, didn't start it. Tencent and I affirm our first contentions removing the root cause. Quayle 18 writes that since 2001, terrorist attacks have increased by 500% in the regions where the US has had the highest level of military involvement. Schmidt 19 finds that ISIS, for example, has already been regaining in strength in part due to US military actions. The US military presence in Arab states exacerbates terrorism in 3 ways. The first is the Hydra effect. Dear 13 explains that US focus in counterterrorism is using targeted killings to take out terrorist leaders. However, Dear continues that this only radicalizes terrorist groups even further because they rally behind the martyrdom of their leader. That is why Jordan 14 quantifies that killing a terrorist leader increases the probability of that group surviving by nearly 20%. The second reason is by emboldening repressive regimes. Jones 11 explains that allies like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain are emboldened to repress political dissidents through purges because US military presence makes them feel protected. That's why Slim 13 writes that American support for autocratic Arab regimes was a major factor behind the masses' discontent with their governments. This discontent breeds radicalization, which is why Schumacher 18 quantifies that a 1-unit increase in government purges doubles the number of terrorist attacks. The third reason is through anti-American sentiment. Frederick 18 writes that US troop presence specifically foments radicalization because of its interventionist nature. This is why Art 09 writes that terrorist campaigns are directed at ejecting foreign forces from their homeland, which the PSD 18 reports is their justification for 95% of all suicide attacks. That is why overall, Governor 16 quantifies that for every 1,000 US troops we send to fight on the war on terror, there are 19 additional terrorist attacks. The impact is stunting development. Sandler 14 explains that these attacks have a damaging impact on the economy by scaring away trade, investment, and destroying the economic infrastructure. That is why he quantifies that for every 10 additional terrorist attacks in a country, their GDP falls by almost 0.3%. This is disastrous for the poor. Without investment in funds to develop the economy and create jobs, the poor lose any opportunity for social mobility. That's why the World Bank 15 quantifies that a 1% decrease in GDP increases poverty by 1.7%. Fortunately, by removing our military presence, we address the root causes of terrorism, providing a long-term solution for these countries. Our second contention is a civil conflict catastrophe. Bahrain, a country with more than 7,000 US troops, is on the precipice of civil conflict, as Carpenter 19 writes that the oppressed Shia majority is the next Middle East powder keg waiting to explode. US military presence makes this civil conflict extremely likely for two reasons. The first is by promoting political repression. Jones 11 writes that during the 2011 Arab Spring, the Bahraini government committed atrocious human rights abuses. Unfortunately, he continues that it was the US military presence that made the government feel secure enough to act recklessly. Since then, Mansoub 20 writes that Bahrain's human rights abuses have only worsened, and Rogan 19 confirms this is due to continued US military support. This makes the area rife for civil conflict, as Trans 16 quantifies that as human rights abuses increase, the probability of civil war rises by 34% within a decade. The second reason is by encouraging Iranian involvement. Because of its proximity and geopolitical importance, Glazer 17 writes that US bases in Bahrain represent a priority target for Iran. In fact, Geoff 20 reports that Iran has already begun funding numerous Shia militia as they see the area as a unique target of opportunity because of the US. Thus, our military presence has encouraged Iran to engage in Bahrain, which is detrimental, as Carpenter 19 finds that Iran can light the fuse to ignite Bahrain into a civil conflict. That's why overall, Oslam 10 quantifies that for every 3 years of US military presence on national soil, the probability of civil conflict increases by 83%. The impact is a failed state. Carpenter 19 writes that Bahrain can become the next major conflict in the Middle East, akin to the civil wars in Syria and Yemen. This would be disastrous, as Willen 16 writes that civil wars are the worst form of conflict a country can experience because they destroy the internal economic and political institutions. That's why the civil wars in Yemen and Syria have already killed hundreds of thousands of people and plunged millions into poverty. Fortunately, this can be averted in Bahrain. If the US removes its military presence, the likelihood of civil conflict goes down and peace in Bahrain is attainable. Thus, we affirm.
Sorry, before Leo reads case, can I see the first card you read under Bahrain? Like the under the second contention, the first card you read? I didn't get the card name.
The Carpenter evidence?
Sure.
We cited a couple parts of it. Do you want to see the part where it says like it's the next Middle East powder keg? That's like the beginning of the case.
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Okay, I can send that to you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Can I say the US does targeted killings of terrorist leaders?
I can get that.
And I'll start prep when I get the email. Just let me know when I should expect.
Yeah. Wait, Tenzin, I'll just put it on the same email, so it's like easier.
Okay, sure.
Or actually, I can just read it while Leo reads case if that's okay. So just let me know when it's ready and he'll start speaking.
Yeah, I'm sending it right now. The other one you want to see was the targeted killings, right?
No, that's the due evidence.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sending the email to y'all now. Let me know if you received it.
Yeah, I haven't gotten it yet, but I'll let you know when I get it. Perfect, I got it. Leo, do you want to read this now, or do you want me to read it while you read the case?
Sorry, I was muted. I can read it for just a bit.
Okay. So I'll start prep now. Okay, is that good? We used 11 seconds.
Right. Is anyone not ready? Great. We negate. Our sole contention is fostering instability. American military presence in the Persian Gulf has ushered in an era of relative stability in the Middle East. Hagerdal of the Center for Strategic Studies in 2019 explains that the US acts as a stabilizer for the region, using its strategic bases to secure shipping lanes and deterring state actors such as Russia from taking control of the region. Reducing US military presence in the region would result in two catastrophic harms, and the first is Russian roulette. Russia is in crisis, as Doff of Bloomberg explains in 2020 that going into this year, Putin's main goal was to lead Russia's economic revival and boost living standards in order to revitalize his faltering support and secure his re-election 4 years from now. However, the New York Times reports in 2018 that oil is Russia's single most important ingredient in its economic success. Problematically, Doff continues that as the coronavirus sweeps the globe, oil prices have plummeted farther than they have in a decade, and Russia's main trading partners are on the brink of recession. As a result, Putin's plan has faltered, leaving inflating oil prices the only way out of a dire economic crisis. Tim Mirko of The Guardian explains in 2015 that the more the region remains in strife and the further conflict spreads, the more oil prices rise, helping Putin stage an economic recovery at home. As a result, Crosby of Foreign Policy in 2019 furthers that without the US to stop it, Russia would seize this opportunity to step in as the main actor in the Middle East and create instability in a bid to raise oil prices. Increasing oil prices would be disastrous. Any Russian military action would increase global oil prices. Bloomberg in 2019 reports that even limited strikes in the Persian Gulf would increase oil prices by from $80 to $100. Any sudden price hike would be felt by those who are the most vulnerable. Mayer of the Journal of International Studies in 2018 finds that every increase in the price of a unit of oil increases the price of food by 0.42%, with these price increases remaining even if the price of oil returns. This is why Wiggins of the ODI continues that keeping oil prices low is critical to reducing the number of people who are malnourished, mainly concentrated in developing nations, by 14%. Second, Saudi Arabia nuclearization. Despite fears of the Iranian nuclear threat, Saudi Arabia has withheld from developing their own nuclear weapons. As Duran of the Hudson Institute explains, they feel safe under the American security umbrella. Indeed, Anderson of the INSS writes in 2013, the presence of conventional military forces in the Middle East is critical in reassuring allies of the American commitment to their safety, serving as a tangible symbol that the United States is willing to risk American lives to protect an ally. Brown of the Air and Space University in 2017 explains that while Saudi Arabia would prefer to be under the protection of the United States, if there is the perception that the US is leaving them, they'll be forced to nuclearize to protect themselves from the growing Iranian threat. The impact of Saudi Arabia creating nuclear weapons is twofold, and the first is a preemptive war. As nations begin to nuclearize, they become a large target for preemptive strikes from rival nations. Tit Mayer of the University of Chicago explains in 2011 that because nations see nuclearization as an existential threat, preemptive strikes become a rational choice for state actors. If Saudi Arabia began this process, Bowman of the Committee on Foreign Relations finds in 2008 that Israel would be able to detect Saudi Arabia's development and would launch a preemptive strike in order to halt its progress. Bowman furthers that even limited Israeli airstrikes would be viewed by the Muslim world as an attack from the Jewish state against the Islamic Holy Land, resulting in unprecedented levels of radicalization and conflict against the US and Israel. Second, proxy wars. Even without a preemptive strike, Saudi Arabia would become more aggressive in the region. Mayerly of CNA explains in 2014 that because nuclear powers deter larger actors from taking retaliatory action, nuclear powers escalate and participate in conflicts much more than those without nuclear weapons. Because of this, Allison of Kent State University finds in 2018 that there's a 54% increase in the likelihood of proxy wars between nuclear powers. Overall, any conflict in the region would be deadly. As Prasad of the Armed Forces India Medical Journal in 2011 concludes, the onset of armed conflict in already vulnerable countries increases death rates by 24 times. We are incredibly proud to negate.
You guys ready for crossfire?
I am. Let me just start my timer.
Okay, I'll start the timer when I ask the first question. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll start the time now. So let's talk about your first subpoint about Russia. So you say that Russia is being really hurt by the oil prices going down, right?
Yes.
But that's why they want to invade and make oil prices go up again, right?
Not necessarily invade, just cause general chaos in the region, like destabilize governments, launch airstrikes, etc.
Okay, so then my question is, why did Russia engage in the oil price war where they oversupplied the entire market, causing the first reason why oil prices tanked? If you say they're incentivized.
Right, okay, so I'll explain. Because coronavirus was already causing oil prices to tank in the first place.
Why would they make it?
Russia's reaction, can I just finish explaining? Thank you. Russia's reaction was merely a response to that. They needed to essentially just put out a bunch of oil. They just needed to sell a bunch of oil because the price of oil was so low in order to make up the profit that they had lost. And in doing so, they violated the agreement, the OPEC agreement they had with Saudi Arabia to limit production. But can I ask a question about your case?
Sure. That doesn't really explain it.
Okay. I'm just going to ask a question. Great. So let's talk about terrorism for a second. The U.S. sends troops where? In areas that are really peaceful or in areas that have a lot of conflict?
I would say that we have permanent military presence in like a bunch of countries for like 50 years. I think it's hard to say that like they sent troops in that region because there's conflict then, and then be like,
no,
just spurred for like the last 50 years.
Sorry, I think you're misunderstanding my question. I understand that we have presence in regions. For instance, we have a presence in the Persian Gulf right now. But
right,
within those regions, sorry, I'm just gonna. Yeah. But within those regions, wherever they may be in the world, the U.S., would you agree, sends troops to specific parts of those regions that have more conflict or less conflict?
I would say both. Like Kuwait's pretty peaceful and we have like 13,000 troops there. Iraq's not that peaceful. We have like 5,000 troops there. I don't think that's the internal reason why. The reason why.
Really? Well, wait, let's just examine the incentive structure of the United States really quickly. What incentive would they have to send a lot of troops to a really, really peaceful place?
Why? Because they see it as strategically important. Like Kuwait, they see as strategically important because like Iran's right on the border. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, I just don't think that applies to counterterrorism troops, and that's where the distinction comes in. You can go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about your argument about proxy wars, right?
Sure.
Are there proxy wars going on right now?
Yeah, but A, they're not nearly as widespread, and B, they're not nearly as bad as they can be if Saudi Arabia.
Yemen, like that's a lot. How many more proxy wars are going to be? Like these countries don't have infinite number of funds. They're already funding proxy wars in Syria.
I mean, okay, right. So there are so many hotspots. I'm sorry, there are so many hotspots in the Middle East right now. Plus, we would say that involvement in those wars could get far worse. But this feels like it's a response and not a question. So I'm just going to ask a question using the last 12 seconds of time. Again, the U.S. has an incentive to send troops where? Just binary yes or no answer. Do they have an incentive to send troops into areas with more conflict?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Like it's not historically backed at all. Your question. I responded already. Okay. We'll start prep. Yeah, we'll start prep now.
Okay, we're ready.
So we finished prep. It was 54 seconds.
I know, can you mute yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, is everyone ready? Can you hear me well? Okay. I'll start the time. Okay. I'll start the time. Now, on their first subpoint about Russian first realize that Russia is absolutely bogged down by a massive coronavirus outbreak. This is really important because they have no incentive to ever expand into the region. They're focusing on domestic stability first. But second, Janot 13 writes that Russia has adopted a reactive policy in the Middle East, only investing in interest to counter U.S. presence because they don't want America to be the only global power in the region. When they're making their own decisions, he explains that they have no intention of filling in and taking over the entire region. That's never going to happen. They're only interested when the U.S. is interested too. But third, even if they had the incentive, Janot 13 furthers that Russia does not have the military capacity to actually project power into the region because they have no ties with the countries that the U.S. is involved with, and so their physical presence is extremely limited. That means it's not likely that they fill in anyways. But fourth, even if Russia has the incentive and the capacity, because of the regional divides between current U.S. allies and countries like Iran, China, and Russia's support for Iran, it has alienated them from all the other actors, making them much more apprehensive of accepting Russia and China's help. But then fifth, even if Russia was so concerned about high oil prices, Arnav alludes to this in Cross. Why would they flood the market with oil like they did in March? But the oil prices started crashing because of the price war, not Corona. The price war started first, so if they really cared, they wouldn't have done this anyways. But then on the impact, first realize that higher oil prices are probably good because they allow renewable energy to become more cost competitive with fossil fuels. In fact, Schmitz 09 quantifies that 65% of all the variation investment in renewables can be explained by oil price spikes. This outweighs their impact because the greatest threat to the economy in the long run is global warming because it affects the entire world. But then their second thing is about Saudi nuclearization, but there are a lot of problems with this. First is because Saudi already does not think that the U.S. is providing them protection, which is why instead of militarizing, they're actually forming regional alliances right now because the security guarantee is slowly decreasing in the status quo. Their argument is literally happening right now, but what they're saying is not coming true. But second, everything they say falls apart because of the fact that the security guarantee is still present through our arms sales. According to a 2018 Rand Corporation report, a U.S. military presence does not include arms sales, so they still continue. This Saudi Arabia views arms sales as more of a security guarantee than troops because we have sent arms for decades and we have deployed more troops only in the last couple of months. That means that historically Saudi thinks that their security guarantee comes from continued arms sales at the point where they continue in the after the security is always going to be there. There's no point for them to nuclearize. But then they have to prove multiple bright lines here. First, they have to prove that the cessation of our military presence, even though arms are still there, is enough to sever the 70-year-old U.S.-Saudi alliance. And second, that the quest for nuclear weapons outweighs creating an enemy out of the United States, even with all the associated consequences, but neither of them are likely to materialize. But third, Saudi Arabia has long upheld the proposal that the Middle East should be a WMD-free zone, assuring the international community that they will never pursue a bomb. That means that no convincing evidence has ever been produced, which implicates the kingdom with any sort of nuclear program ever being created. Even during the 1970s, when U.S. and Saudi relations plummeted to historic lows, the kingdom issued an oil embargo. There was no hint of any sort of nuclearization ever happening. But over the past decades, Saudi Arabia's economy has been liberalizing and growing more interconnected in the global economy and stronger. This process has brought the kingdom closer to accepted international norms of behavior and weight us on probability. That means that Saudi Arabia is always going to have the incentive to drive economic success, which is why despite our pullouts in the past, they have never nuclearized and instead opted for the diplomacy. It's exactly what's happening in status quo. Precedent proves them wrong. But then Saudi doesn't have any capability to nuclearize because the Nuclear Threat Initiative last June explains that they don't have any nuclear reactors or any meaningful quantities of nuclear materials. Implicate this in two ways. First is on time frame because they have to build up decades of nuclear infrastructure and acquire like a bunch of nuclear materials. There's no telling how long this takes. But two, on probability because Saudi Arabia is not going to invest in something they don't have at all. But that's why overall the University of Florida concludes that it's highly unlikely that they seek out a nuclear bomb. But then they try to talk about Israel. But the problem is that Israel and Saudis are better allies right now because they share the same common mortal enemy, which is Iran. They're never going to attack Saudi. But the second problem is that the U.S. is always going to provide a security guarantee to Israel and not leave them in the dark because Israel has a lot of supporters in Congress, so Israel's always going to be there. But third, realize that the probability of this happening is close to zero because according to a general himself, all the threats of a strike are empty because they're in no position to launch a strike. But then they try to say proxy wars. But the problem with this is that it's really non-unique. These proxy wars in Yemen are happening right now. But second, Rover 19 explains that the regional balance of power is favorable. This is true even if the U.S. withdraws completely because no state in the region possesses the capabilities to gain a controlling influence, and overall the region is in a state of defensive dominance.
Can I see the last piece of evidence you read? And I'll start time when I see.
The Rovner evidence?
Sure. If that was the...
Okay, I can say it.
I know we can get that.
Yeah, I got you.
So let me know when you're set to.
I just sent it, by the way.
Great. I haven't gotten it yet, but I'll let you know.
Are you guys taking prep now, or are you going to wait until the evidence?
No, we're waiting.
Oh, okay.
I got it. Okay, I'll start prep. Starting now. All right, is everyone ready? We're gonna start on our case, and then go to yours. Start off on our first contention. We can see that Russia probably won't go in because they don't have enough money with the coronavirus. Now onto our second contention about Saudi Arabian nuclearization. First, they tell you that Saudi Arabia doesn't think that they have the U.S. Guidance anymore, and they think that they've already severed ties. However, this is simply not true because since all of this, Trump has actually been increasing troops into Saudi Arabia. He's been increasing his support. As long as he has troops, it literally doesn't matter what happens to their relationship. That's the strongest secure. That's what Brown tells you. But then they tell you arms sales is the same thing. First, I would argue that arms sales are very much a military presence. They'd probably go away or at least decrease if we took out our troops there because we like to have our troops there. But second, even if we continue doing arms sales, those don't A, protect Saudi Arabia from the Iranian threat like a nuclear deterrent would, but B, they don't show the symbol that Saudi Arabia needs in order to prevent it from nuclearized. But then they tell you that Saudi Arabia doesn't want nukes even if they could get them. And they give you the example of the 70s. But in the 70s, they didn't have to contend with this big of a rising nuclear threat that is Iran, and the threat in the region is completely different. But second, it was a completely different time. But then they tell you that they prioritize economic success. However, what the New York Times explains is that because they see this as an existential threat to their security, it's way more important than any economy. They're always going to do whatever they have to protect themselves. But then they say that they have no capacity. But what Lewis in 2015 explains is that they literally have a nuclear energy facility. It would be very easy for them to switch over. India has nuclearized. All these different countries have nuclearized. They're on the path to. They could do it really easily. But then they say proxy wars are non-unique because they're happening right now. But many more would happen. Saudi Arabia would become much more emboldened in them, and it would be much worse. But then they say, secondly, that they say that there's no place that right now no one's establishing a hegemony in the region. It's not right for establishing hegemony. We're not talking about establishing hegemony. We're talking about proxy wars, which are going to be really bad and going to increase. But this is the most important impact in the round because if there's a nuclear Saudi Arabia, it doesn't matter. They're going to be more aggressive. It's going to increase terrorism in the region in the long term because terrorism comes from we both agreed conflict, and it's going to increase all these battles in Bahrain and anywhere else that they tell you. This is the most important impact to stop. But then onto their case. First, they talk to you about the root cause of terrorism. However, von der Hey in 2018 of Dayton University explains that it's actually reverse causal, this evidence, because what he finds is because the US goes to regions that have like a lot of conflict, of course that there's going to be more conflict and more terrorism in those regions. But what he actually finds is terrorism actually decreases when the US presence is there and only increases when the US leaves. This is really important because we would say that a massive US pullout would have unprecedented levels of terrorism. But then they talk to you about like hydro-targeted killing. But we would say you would prefer this to a large-scale military attack that other regions other than the US would do, which would kill massive amounts of civilians, because that's actually when you can recruit a lot of people to your terrorist organizations and bolster it. But second, it actually just kills a lot of people, which is really, really bad. But then they talk to you about emboldening really bad regimes. However, what von der Hey continues is that we actually use our leverage to prop up, to make our, to hold our regimes accountable. This is what we've done with all of our partnerships in the Middle East. We actually bring them to the negotiation table. We actually help this. But then they talk to you about anti-US sentiment. But what Nidell of Georgetown University in 2019 explains is that anti-US sentiment actually just means disapproving of the US government and the US regime. It literally on the ground has no impact on an actual increase of terrorism. But we would say we link into their impact better, because if there's more increase in conflict from Saudi Arabia, you're going to see more terrorism and hurt the economy in the long term. But then they talk to you about Bahrain. A couple issues here. First, their uprising is going to happen either way. Their evidence says that it's prime for uprising. We would say this is not unique. But second, we would say it's actually going to get a lot worse if an actor like China comes in, or if Iran gets more hegemonic power in the region. It's going to get a lot worse. But second, they talk to you about Iran, and they say that the only reason Iran is attacking is because of U.S. presence. But what Nidell of Georgetown explains is that Bahrain is actually a part of the Saudi coalition. They have long-term tensions, Sunni and Shia tensions, that are always going to make it like a breeding ground for conflict in the region. But what the Brookings Institute actually concludes is that the U.S. could actually solve this in the long term, because they actually stop they stop Iran from being emboldened, and they actually bring Iran to the negotiation table in the long term. So if you actually want to have long-term peace in the region, the only way to do it is with U.S. presence. Are you ready for cross?
Okay. Okay, I'll start. Yeah. Okay, on arms sales. Yeah. So for the past 5 decades, different question. So when were troops recently introduced into Saudi Arabia?
When were they most recently new rounds of troops deployed? Or when
just the majority of troops? When was our biggest deployment of troops to Saudi?
Oh, well, we've deployed them consistently for a very long time. We've had troops since the 1970s. We've had a steady presence.
No, our arms sales have been there since the 1970s, and our arms sales have been there since the 1970s, and our troops have been there for a couple of months. So what do you think, if you were making Saudi Arabia's decision?
This is untrue, because this is not our argument. Is not well. First, we've had troops in Saudi Arabia for a very long time. We've been involved in the region since the 1970s. But our argument is also not just about troops right in Saudi Arabia. It's on the borders. It's protecting them from Iran, and it's having a actual troop presence in the region. But can I get a question? Yeah. Okay, so Iran is why does Iran not like Bahrain? Why do they?
Because of religious differences.
Okay.
Is that it?
Do these religious differences go away if the U.S. is there or not?
No, but what goes away is Bahrain's emboldenment to continue. The only reason. Another reason why. Okay, Iran. No, it's not mainly religious differences. It's also the fact that Iran, because the U.S. is there, Iran sees it as geopolitically a strategic place to attack.
But you just said that it's the reason that Iran and Bahrain have differences, or because they're religious differences, and so those are always going to exist, right? So the conflict is always going to exist, no?
But, same thing with proxy wars. If religious differences are always there, aren't proxy wars always going to continue?
No, because proxy wars aren't about religious differences.
Yeah, they are. Yemen is about religious differences. That's a proxy war, and it's literally the worst proxy war in the Middle East right now.
Well, so a couple things. I would say that first, Yemen is not necessarily just about religious differences. It's a civil war where and also, but secondly, I would also say that you can avoid starting proxy wars. It's not like everyone who has religious differences gets into war, right? But your argument is that Iran has consistently been attacking Bahrain because they have religious differences. That's what you just told me.
Bahrain, they've been supplying Shia militia. Okay, but can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, so on nuclearization, right? You say that right now. I said that Saudi has no capability to nuclearize. Is nuclear energy a nuclear weapon?
No, but it's mainly the same like function. So if you can produce nuclear energy, what Lewis concludes in his study is that it would be super easy for them to take the same parts and just transfer it. And he says they could do it in under a year.
Sure. But nuclear energy, you have to enrich uranium to a certain percent to actually create a nuclear weapon. What percent is that?
I don't know exactly what percentage is, but what he
nuclear
concluded at the end of his study, and I trust him a lot more than I trust me, is that they could nuclearize within a year.
Yeah, in like a year or 2 years. Okay. We'll start taking prep.
Wait a sec, I'm starting prep. Wait a sec. I'll start it now. Oh, guys, we're pausing prep right now. Can we see the denuclearization evidence? That going from nuclear energy to nuclear weapons is super easy.
Yeah, I'll send it to you one second.
Yeah, and that'll be it. We'll take the next 10 seconds for prep, and that'll be it.
Well, actually, can we just take a little bit more prep?
Sorry?
Start it.
I just emailed it to you, so you should have it.
Okay, I'll see if I got it. Okay, starting prep about that now. Wait a second, guys. In this evidence, did you guys highlight the part that's like transferring nuclear energy? Like, which part is it that's nuclear energy to nuclear bombs is easy?
It says, more importantly, starting there, and then, but for a nuclear weapon state, not nearly. If you read
okay.
more importantly,
Okay, yeah.
and then keep reading until you get there. It's like the highlighted parts basically is just him explaining how easy it would be for Saudi Arabia to nuclearize.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Oh, sorry, I was muted. So I'll start on our first contention, then go to your second contention. Yeah. Is everyone ready? Yeah. Good. Okay. Wait. Oh no. My computer hanged. Okay. Everyone good? I'll start the time now. Start on our first contention about terrorism. They read two responses at the top. They first say it's not causal, but all of our evidence is empirical. They control for the fact if a country is in conflict or not, and still Governor finds that every 1,000 US troops you put in, you have 19 additional terrorist attacks. It accounts for everything. But second, they say that terrorism goes down with US presence. But look at long-term trends instead of short-term ones. After we've put in the US presence, in the last 20 years, it's increased by 500%, specifically in the regions where we have the most military involvement. The reason why is because the US never addressed the root cause of the conflict. They always just put a bandit solution on it, but then it gets much worse. That's why you see every single time it just resurges again. That's why ISIS is resurging again, because of US military actions. They can see that evidence, they can see that uniqueness as well. Go to our second link about repressive regimes. Jones says that countries feel emboldened because the US presence allows them to act recklessly because they feel protected because of that. As a result, they've been conducting massive political purges to combat against political dissidents. And this breeds discontent, as Schumacher finds that every 1 unit increase in government purges doubles the number of terrorist attacks. Their only response is that we hold them accountable. That's historically just not true. In Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, during the Arab Spring, in the last 10 years, human rights abuses have been only gotten worse because we see our security we prioritize our security importance in that region over these humanitarian abuses. That's why they've been turning a blind eye, especially during the Trump administration. That's the first place where you can have an increase in terrorist attacks. The second place is on our second link, where we say that anti-American sentiment is fomented by US intervention. They say that there's no impact, it's not unique. But the specific reason why all this happens is because of foreign presence. The terrorists themselves do not hate American ideology, they hate American intervention. That's why 95% of all suicide attacks are to repel forces directly from the region. That goes away once you take out military troops. That leads us to our Gopner evidence that gives you the scalar impact that every 1,000 troops allows us to decrease every 1,000 troops we put in means 19 more terrorist attacks. And that's really bad because that destroys the internal economic foundations of these countries by scaring away investor and trade. That's why every 10 additional terrorist attacks Sandler finds decreases GDP by 0.3%, and every 1% decrease in GDP hurts the poor really bad because they don't have the ability to get the jobs that you need for the economy. That's why it's an increase of 1.7% in poverty. This outweighs our case in a few reasons. The first is that it's a prereq to any conflict because terrorism breeds domestic instability, which increases the likelihood of conflict in the region. That means we link into a conflict too. But second, on the long term, terrorism destroys economic development, which forces generations of people to live in poverty because the country cannot get any sort of investment necessary to develop their economy. Their conflicts only last a few years, but then they can just bounce back as long as after the proxy wars happen. But there is on scope. They can only impact you a certain proxy wars, but we're impacting you to every single country the US has military presence in. We're always going to be outweighing that. And third is on probability, because they themselves say that Bahrain has a lot of political, lot of religious differences. This applies to every single conflict in the region that's happening right now. That means proxy wars are always going to be likely, but terrorism uniquely goes down when you have less military presence. That's how we're going to win probability. But then on the Bahrain, they read a couple terms. They say Iran's going to be hedged, but that's not true because they can see the Rovner evidence says there's no hegemony. They say China will come in, but they have no physical capacity. And then they say Iran's going to come to the table if the US leaves. They're never going to come to the table unless sanctions go away. That doesn't happen. Go to their case. They miss a couple of responses. At first, Saudi Arabia does not even think that we had security guarantee in 2019. Even if we put in troops now, they didn't think so then. They did not nuclearize then because they instead went to regional alliances. That disproves their entire argument. The second we would say is that they missed the fact, all of the Brightline analysis, that they want to not prioritize nuclear energy. And third, we would say is that arms sales are the crux behind the military presence. We put in troops in Saudi Arabia for the first time in 17 years this year. That means the arms sales is what provides the security guarantee, and Rand finds that arms sales are different than military presence.
Okay, I'm gonna get Leo on the phone and then I'll start prep.
Yeah, how's it?
Starting now. All right. That's our prep.
All right. I'm going to be starting on our case, and then I'm going to weigh, and then I'll go into yours. Or onto theirs. Is anyone not ready? Great. We're winning the round on our second subpoint about Saudi Arabian nuclearization. That is, Duran explains to you explicitly that right now Saudi Arabia is not nuclearizing because it feels safe under the US security umbrella. The presence of military forces, as Anderson says, is essential. It's the only tangible symbol that maintains that the US is willing to risk American lives in order to defend an ally. This is crucial, as Brown explains, that with the perception that the US is leaving them and the perception alone that we're no longer willing to defend them, Saudi Arabia will nuclearize to defend itself against what it sees as an existential threat, that is, Iran's own nuclearization. The impact of this is disastrous. It's proxy wars, as Merrily explains that nuclear powers are emboldened in conflict. And Allison explains that there's a 54% chance, increase of chance in proxy wars between nuclear powers. Not only are there more proxy wars, they're also more deadly. As Prasad explains that death rates increase 24 times in already vulnerable regions and new ones. But then they make a couple of responses. Number one, they say that Saudi Arabia doesn't think there's a security guarantee right now, but that doesn't make any sense at all. That's because the Brown evidence is very specific in saying that we have a tangible symbol in order to commit to the safety of an ally. They don't give you any warning as to why they think that they don't have a security guarantee. But then second, they say that they turn to regional alliances, but the situations under which they turn to regional alliances are very different under the situations that are happening now when Iran is just a growing and growing threat. Then they tell you that that Saudi Arabia doesn't have the capacity to nuclearize, but this doesn't make any sense at all. Let's examine this from an actual scientific level, even though I'm not a physicist. That is, if they can make the nuclear reactor technology, which is why Rebecca explains to you very clearly that they can nuclearize in a matter of months. But then finally, they say that arms sales make all this non-unique. That again doesn't make any sense because A, arms sales are not a tangible symbol, as Brown explains to you, as Anderson explains to you, the presence of US military forces is crucial in assuring allies. But second, you can't use a bunch of guns to defend yourself against an Iranian nuclear bomb, which is why they will need a nuclear weapon in order to do so if the US withdraws. But then go on to the impact about proxy wars. Number one, they say this is non-unique, but you can always have more proxy wars and they can always get worse if Saudi Arabia is emboldened. But then second, they say that no state has the capacity to do so. That doesn't make any sense. Rebecca refuted that they didn't front on that. But then, why is anything that we're saying more important than anything that they're saying? First is because once Saudi Arabia gets the bomb, it's irreversible. Whereas things like the economy, which is their impact to terrorism, are always reversible. It can always go back up again. But second, because our argument functions as a prerequisite of theirs. Let's think about this at a logical level. If all of a sudden there's a bunch of proxy wars in the region, obviously there's going to be more terrorism and more harm to the economy. But then, let's go into their case. A couple of problems here. Number one, all their evidence is reverse causal. They just say they cite empirical evidence. But that's the point, right? The more US forces go into the region, chances are the more conflict there is in the region. That's not a causality, it's just a correlation. But then, on their subpoint specifically, they say that historically we never had any leverage over an ally to get them to stop doing this. But this isn't just,
You cut out.
Yeah, I can't hear him either.
Uh-oh. Okay, so
Rebecca, that is, that right now, that is anti-American.
You cut out.
Oh, great. Okay.
I think he had like 40 seconds left. Was anyone else timing? I had that he had like 45 seconds. And it was when he said correlation, right? You're muted.
he said leverage. That was the last thing. He was like that we don't have leverage, but we do.
Oh yeah, you said we don't have leverage over other actors.
Yeah, that was.
He said you. Yeah, you were backlining their response.
Yeah. Wait, so how much time do you have left, Leo?
I was using the stopwatch and I just reset it. I'm so sorry.
Do you remember?
I was timing. I had 45 seconds left.
I can do that if you want, or we can like do 30 or.
I don't know. If you had 45 seconds.
No.
Sorry.
What? Okay.
You had 45 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, if you want me to do that, I'm fine.
Sure. I don't know. It felt longer than 2:15 because like it seemed like you were about to finish. But anyway, I mean, if you had 45 seconds, then I
Can we do 30? Is that?
Huh?
I promise I wouldn't lie.
Yeah. Okay. Like, there's 45 seconds. Like, you can start on the causality thing then, because that's like.
Okay, that's fine.
So start on causality and then go 45 seconds there.
Okay, great. So I'll just start on the top of your case. That's what you're saying.
Start on top of the case. Yeah.
Okay. Good for everyone. Great. Starting now. Sorry. Is anyone not ready? Great. Starting now. Okay. They just say their evidence is empirical, but that isn't a response to what we're saying. We're saying that it's all reverse causal. Obviously, if the U.S. sends troops into a region, it probably has more conflict. That's correlation, not causality. But then let's go on to the next point about military presence. They just say that we've never used our, a military force to get an ally to do something more humanitarian. But A, we have the only chance of solvency because we have the only chance of leverage over them. But B, we do this all the time with countries like Saudi Arabia. But then finally, on their point about anti-American sentiment, they severely mishandled the response that Rebecca puts on this. That is that anti-American sentiment isn't an accurate measure of terrorism because anti-American sentiment just means you don't approve of America. A lot of Americans that approve of America. But then finally, on their way, number one, the economy is always, going up and down. So it's really reversible, whereas nuclearization isn't. Finally, on their scope weighing, this doesn't make any sense because obviously you'll have a lot more proxy wars through Saudi Arabia's involvement.
You ready for ground cross?
Yeah, let me just start my timer again because I just started off my phone. Okay. Great.
Okay. So I'll start the timer now. Okay, so here's my question. So in 2019, Saudi Arabia thought that the U.S. was withdrawing from their actor as their role as a regional protector, and so they saw the security guarantee decreasing, and that's why the evidence that we read says that they went towards regional alliances.
No.
So my question is that.
I don't think that's true.
But it happened 4 months ago.
Saudi Arabia, no. What you're talking about is that Saudi Arabia saw that the U.S. they felt wasn't protecting them to the full extent or wasn't acting aggressively enough in the region or made them comfortable. So in response, what Trump did was he increased his troop presence in the region.
Right. No, okay. But the question is, in the time period where they felt that they did not have the security guarantee, why was their gut reaction not to nuclearize, but to form regional alliances?
They never had that time. There was never.
That's why they formed the alliances, right?
They started alliances.
There were never times in which Saudi Arabia didn't feel that they had the U.S. guarantee because there was never time. Wait, you can have regional alliances, and you can also have a U.S. security guarantee. We agree. We actually think that the U.S. security guarantee encourages alliances, which is the reason we have.
Sorry, y'all. You can call for the evidence. We say it in every speech, and we get that Trump put in troops later. But our point is, in the time where the Saudi Arabia thought the U.S. was not protecting them, in the time where we had not put in troops, that few months, why wouldn't they go? There has never been a time since we put in troops that we haven't had troops in the region. So this time period that you're talking about doesn't exist. Okay, I'll read the headline here. U.S. military building presence in Saudi Arabia for the first time in 17 years. At that
said.
So the evidence we cite saying that we didn't have military presence before. This is the title. U.S. military building presence in Saudi Arabia for the first time in 17 years. That's from
No, I'm saying since we had a military presence in Saudi Arabia and in the Persian Gulf, which is what the evidence explains, that it's not just having a military presence in the country of Saudi Arabia. First, we've never pulled out of Saudi Arabia since we went there. But second, it's in the entire Persian Gulf because they see us as an actor to stability who's there willing to protect them. But could I get a question? We spent almost.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so you talk about the root cause of terrorism being anti-American sentiment or or is it regime sentiment or your government?
One is when regimes act repressive, then they get mad at the regime, so they're more likely to radicalize. And second is that when the U.S. acts imperialist in these countries, they radicalize over that as well.
So in terms of being repressive in a government, how does that manifest itself?
Bahrain, for example, did atrocious human rights abuses. What they did, tortured hundreds of political dissidents, exiled hundreds more, made thousands lose their jobs. That's all the government purges we talk about that gives us our Schumacher evidence that says the double stress. And that's okay. We have 10 seconds. We'll start prep now.
Okay. Can you mute yourself, Nova? Okay. I'm going to be starting on our case. Is everyone ready? You're good? Okay. You want to hear me right? Okay, starting the time. Now, we're going for our first contention about removing the root cause. Remember, terrorism, our evidence empirically controls for everything. Overall, terrorism has increased 500% in the places that we're the most involved. This is really important because that means the reason why is because of our first link. Jones 11 tells you that countries feel emboldened because of the fact that they have US-backed presence. This breeds discontent among the citizens of these countries like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. That's really important because that's why Schellmacher 2018 finds that a 1-unit increase in purges doubles the amount of terrorist attacks that actually happens. That's really because their only response at the end of the day is that there's no correlation. But the problem is our evidence is all empirical and it counts for every single thing. So this response doesn't really matter. But then our second thing about anti-American sentiment, they handle this really, really badly because what we're saying is that our presence foments radicalization in these countries. What's really important about this is that they only have one response at the end of the round, and this response is that we use our to the repressive regimes. They only say that we use our leverage. But the problem with this is that even we have the leverage, we're not using the leverage. Human rights abuses are increasing and they're getting worse every single year in these countries. At that point, you know that they're emboldening terrorism. That's why terrorism is increasing in the status quo. That's why 95% of all attacks are to scare away intervention, and why every 1,000 troops we put into the Middle East, there are 19 more attacks. That's really important because every 10 attacks decrease the GDP of countries by 0.3%, and a 1% decrease in GDP increases poverty by 1.7%. This is really important because we're going to outweigh, they try to say that it's non-unique, but the problem is that they don't hate the ideology, they hate the fact that there is foreign intervention in these countries. We're going to be outweighing in two key ways. First, we both have prereq weighing, so could prefer our other types of weighing. The first weighing is probability because proxy wars are always going to happen because of religious differences, but terrorism uniquely goes down in the Afro because the reason why it's happening right now is because of US presence. But the second reason is because Saudi Arabia, like the nuclear threat initiative from June, literally says that they have no meaningful quantities of any sort of nuclear material, so there's no probability of them doing it anyways. That's really important because compare that to ours, but also in the long term, because at the point where terrorism destroys economic harms long term, but their conflicts are short term at best, we're always going to wait to structural harms. But even at that point, they never respond to the regional alliances. At the point where they literally thought that we were withdrawing from the Middle East and they turned to regional alliances, they don't really handle this well. Their first gut instinct is to make sure alliances happen, not nuclearization.
All right. Going to be our case and then their case. With that, is everyone ready? The cleanest place to vote in this round is on our second subpoint about Saudi Arabia nuclearization. It's been really mishandled. What Doran in 2019 explains is that the reason that Saudi Arabia is not nuclearizing right now is because they have the U.S. has always had troops and presence in the region, so they feel secure under the U.S. umbrella. They know that the U.S. will defend them. However, what Brown finds is the perception of on-the-ground troops leaving the region will lead them to nuclearize because they will feel that they were all alone in the region and the U.S. will no longer protect them. They are vulnerable to Iran. However, if they were to nuclearize, this is really bad because Marilei in 2019 explains is that nuclear powers are emboldened in conflict. That's why she finds there's a 54% increase in proxy conflicts through nuclear powers, increasing death rates by 24 times. Their only response in final focus is when we had a loss of security guarantee, Saudi Arabia went to regional alliances. We would say Saudi Arabia can do both. They can go to regional alliances. It has nothing to do with the U.S. presence. The only time they nuclearize is when we have all of our troops leave the region. They see that they've totally been left behind. They know that a regional protector cannot protect them from Iran and like a nuclear threat like the U.S. can, and that's when they uniquely have to nuclearize. But why is this most important? And this is the weighing that Leo gives you that's conceded through the round. First, he says that it's irreversible. Once you nuclearize it, you can't go back from it. These conflicts are going to happen. But second, it's a prerequisite to their entire terror argument because once you see Saudi Arabia is emboldened and the U.S. no longer has leverage in the region, you're actually going to see an increase in terror in the long term out of these proxy conflicts. But second, because proxy conflicts hurt regimes and they're actually going to make like the economy worse, which is their only impact. But then onto their side of the flow. They give you literally no solvency throughout the entire round, and the weighing that they give you is that it's on probability. But what we would say is it's really not probable. They just tell you why the U.S. actions are really bad. But we've seen terrorism in these regions for as long as you can remember. It doesn't, like, they have no solvency for how you're actually going to stop the root cause of terrorism. So we would say that probability is a really bad way to weigh it. who a Vonderhaar finds is the only reason that you actually see an increase in terrorism. The only time you actually see an increase in terrorism is after the U.S. leaves the region. So you're actually going to see on net more terrorism in an AF world. Thus, we urge an affirmative ballot, a negative ballot.
Good round, guys.
Good round, guys.
Good round.
Good round.
Yeah, good round, everybody. Just give me like 5 minutes and then I'll disclose.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, sorry, can in the email chain, can Bronx send me the evidence that you all read about Saudi Arabia turning to regional alliances?
Sure.
Are you getting it?
Can you get it, Tenzin? Mine is a little slower.
Hey, all, this is Tab, just checking in. Is this debate over?
Yeah, it ended. I'm just making my decision right now.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind, making it quick and then keeping the RFD to a minimum, we got to start flight 2. Thanks.
All right, sorry about that. Thanks.
Judge, do you want to see the PDF or just the cut card?
Just the cut card's fine.
All right.
Okay, I just sent it. Okay, I just sent it. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Give me like 3 more minutes and then I'll be done. Okay. I thought this was a really good debate. I ended up voting for the affirmative. So I think that there's a couple of things that just make me tip the scales for the affirmative in this debate. So first thing I would say is on the nuclearization argument, the Saudi nuclearization argument, I don't think that you are winning enough of a risk of a link for me to adequately access the weighing that you do. While I think that the weighing that you all do in this round is really good and solid on the argument, I'm not necessarily convinced at the end of the round that Saudi Arabia is going to nuclearize, especially when they have this evidence that says that Saudi Arabia just recently, when they saw the United States waning off of their commitments to the security alliance for Saudi Arabia didn't nuclearize; they turned to regional allies or did other things. So it puts into a lot of question the probability of your impacts materializing or the scenario materializing itself. Whereas I also think that they're kind of right on the impactee that they do when they say that like proxy wars are non-unique because of religious reasons. And there's like a little bit of contestation and I think one of the cross-examination periods, but it doesn't really get brought back up in speech. And I don't really necessarily know obviously how it's being accessed now that I'm not weighing the Saudi pro-lif argument. But I think that where I vote affirmative is just I think that they're winning some conceded arguments about how so like the first place I actually look is this 500% quant, and there was a lot of evidence. Evidence dispute around this argument, but I don't think that matters as much when the warrants that the affirmative is going for as to why terrorism increases are pretty cleanly extended throughout the round and are facing very little link level responses to, like especially the oppressive regimes argument. I think that responses don't come until really late and that they're just particularly weak. So that ultimately led me to believe that terrorism increases because of U.S. military presence. That's why 95% of attacks are because terrorists are trying to scare away intervention, and that's really bad for conflict, which I guess is like the material impact that both teams are going for. Are there any questions?
No,
No, thank you.
All right, good debate there, y'all. Good luck in your next ones.
Good luck, guys.